back in the probably mid to late 90s, I would imagine. There was a movie that came out. It was actually a remake of a movie that I think came out maybe in the 60s, something like that. But many of you will probably be familiar with this film called The Parent Trap. And if there are those of you that aren't, I'm just going to sum it up really quickly. I'm going to sum up the remake version because that's the one that came out when I was a little kid, and that's the one that I'm familiar with. So in this movie, these two identical twin girls meet at a summer camp. They had been separated at birth. Their parents got divorced, and I don't know if they thought their mom and dad were dead or what the deal was, but one of the girls went to live with her mom in London, and the other one went to live with her dad in California. And so they had lived their whole life until they were like 12 years old, never knowing that the other one even existed. All they had of a record of their other parent that they didn't live with was a picture that was ripped down the middle of it. And so these two little girls wind up being sent to the same summer camp unbeknownst to their parents. They meet each other. They realize not only are they sisters, but they're identical twins, and that they had been separated at birth. And so they hatch this plot, and they decide, okay, I want to know mom, and you want to know dad, so they can't tell us apart. For all they know, I mean, the other one, who knows what happened, but they just don't know what's going on, and so they switch places. And so the one girl goes back to London and the other one goes back to Napa, trading places to play this trick on their parents and bring them together. Now, without spoiling the movie, it works and they all wind up living happily ever after. But the part that I want to draw your attention to is when this one little girl gets off the airplane in California and meets her dad for the first time. This man that she kind of knew had existed once upon a time, but didn't know what had happened to him since the moment of her birth. She sees him and she says just this one simple little word, finally. Finally. Here's why I bring this up. This is the same longing that the Israelite people had for the coming of the Messiah. That when he came, they collectively simply said, finally. The prophecy that we heard in the first reading today from the prophet Micah was written, we don't know exactly, but we can approximate based on a lot of different factors and evidence and research, but probably somewhere between 700 and 800 years before the coming of Christ. The prophet Micah foretold that the Messiah would come from Bethlehem. The prophet Isaiah was writing in the same period, and he foretold the coming of the Messiah also 700 to 800 years prior to his coming. Now, both Micah and Isaiah, and in fact most of the prophets, not all but most, are writing in the time period known as the Babylonian exile. It is vital to understand the true significance of Christmas to properly understand the exile. So let's just run through what happened. Israel, of course, as you know, was enslaved in Egypt. They were set free, but then they continued to turn back to these pagan gods. They continued to turn back to false idols. And God warned them over and over and over again and said, hey, come back to me, repent, repent, repent. They didn't do it. And so God finally said, okay, here's the deal. You're going to get kicked out of the promised land, right? So I've given you this land, but you haven't upheld the covenant. So adios, bye-bye. And they were kicked out, exiled into Babylon, which would be modern-day Iraq. And so the prophet Micah, the prophet Jeremiah, the prophet Isaiah, the prophet Ezekiel, so many of the prophets are writing in the time period of the Babylonian exile, saying, yes, we know that life is bad now, life is rough, but it's gonna get better. You just have to wait. You just have to be faithful. You just have to be patient. How tempting is impatience, brothers and sisters, in these days? When we are longing, if you're a child, like for Christmas morning, so we can tear into these presents. Maybe as an adult, you're longing for your family to be there and to celebrate Christmas dinner together. Maybe it's just the anxiety of thinking, okay, we got to be at the airport at this time. That means we have to leave at this time. That means we have to have everything packed by this time. And of course, kids are never packed on time. And what do we do? It's chaos. This is crazy. Patience. Relax. That's the message of Micah and Jeremiah and Isaiah and Ezekiel and all of the prophets. But these prophecies really, you might say, come to a head. I'm going to draw your attention to this in what are known as the O antiphons. The church prays these every day the last week of Advent, from December 17th through the 23rd. So 7 days, 7 verses, 7 what we call O antiphons. And they come before the verse of the gospel in daily mass. They also come each night in evening prayer. Each of these 7 prophecies foretelling the coming of the Messiah eventually. It's going to happen. So what are they? You are actually all very familiar with these. I've talked about these before, but for the benefit of those who maybe haven't heard it, you are all very, very familiar with these. They make up the verses of O Come, Emmanuel, arguably the greatest Advent hymn that has ever been written. And of course, they put O come, Emmanuel as the first verse. It's actually the last one. Okay, they actually go in like reverse order. So the verse for December 17th is Come Thou Wisdom. It's O Wisdom. Then the verse for the 18th is O come Adonai, or O Lord. The way the hymn puts it, O come, thou Lord of might. And then we get root of Jesse, or rod of Jesse. Then we get the key of David. Then we get the day spring, or the light, the east, the light from the east. Then we get the desire of nations, or the king of the nations, as it's sometimes put. And then finally, tomorrow, the verse for December 23rd, O come, Emmanuel. You put all these together, and I'm going to run through them again, but I told you in English, now I'm going to tell you in Latin. Because when we put them in Latin, it actually says something very profound to us, and you'll see why that is. Wisdom becomes sapientia. Adonai is just the same word, it's Adonai. Then root of Jesse is radix, Jesse. Key of David is clavis David. So you take the first letter of each of these, C-R-A-S. So clavis, radix, Adonai, sapientia, C-R-A-S. And that spells a word, cross. Keep that in mind. And then the next 3, day spring is oriens. That's where we get the word oriental, right? The people from the Orient, the people from the East, the people from the land of the rising sun, the people from where the light comes from. Then we get Rex Gentium, the desired of nations, the king of the nations. So Oriens, Rex, and then finally the one we're all very familiar with, Emmanuel. Put it all together, Emmanuel, Rex, Oriens, clavis, radix, Adonai, sapientia, aerocross. Translate it, that's 2 Latin words. You translate it into English, tomorrow I will come. How beautiful that the church gives us these verses to remind us of the sentiment that was gripping the people of ancient Israel as they longed for the coming of the Messiah. That same longing that little girl had when she met her father for the very first time. The same longing that each of us have for the coming of Christmas in a couple of days. But the people of Israel had this longing for a few thousand years. And it was 700 years prior to the coming of Christ when the prophet Micah said, Bethlehem of Judah, from you the Messiah will come forth. And not only will the Messiah come forth, the Messiah will come forth and set you free from the exile. Not merely the exile in Babylon, but the exile of our separation from God on account of sin. And so we too can say, with that beautiful ancient hymn, O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel that mourns in lonely exile here until the Son of God appear.